Hey guys, welcome to my channel. In today's video, we'll be making this tiered linen skirt. So over here, I made a quick sketch of the skirt and the dimensions that you'll be working with. So the first thing you'll need is your waistband measurement. I wanted mine to fall very loosely on my hips, so I took a larger circumference. I started off by folding my fabric in half and using a chalk to make all the markings for my first tier. The width of your first tier will be your waistband measurement plus 4 inches. The 4 inches is for the darts that you'll be adding later on. So after you add 4 inches to your waistband measurement, you'll get the circumference for your tier 1. Now, since your fabric is folded in half, you'll have to divide your circumference of tier 1 by 2, and that's what you'll use as your width when you're making your markings on your fabric. And for the length of tier 1, I used 12.25 inches. Now your second tier will have 2 blocks because the width of your fabric will not be long enough. Because the width of fashion fabrics usually range between 52 to 54 inches, and using the longer side of the fabric doesn't make sense because you'll end up wasting a lot of fabric. So to get the width of your tier 2, you'll just have to add 33.75 inches to your tier 1 width. Now, since this width is really long, you'll need to divide this into 2 separate blocks. So now you'll just have to divide your tier 2 width by 2 to get the width of each of your blocks. And now, since your fabric is folded in half, you'll need to divide that number by 2 one last time, and this is the number you will use to mark your width on your fabric. And your length for this tier will be 10.5 inches long. So I've already cut up the first block of my second tier, and I'm just finishing up the markings and cutting up the second block of my second tier. Once you're done cutting up both blocks for your tier 2, you can move to tier 3. For tier 3, all you have to do is add 30.5 inches to your tier 2 width. Since the circumference of tier 3 will also be very large, do the same steps as tier 2 to get your width measurements for each block. Also, I forgot to mention that you'll only need 2 meters of fabric for this project. I highly recommend this project for beginners because you really only need a sewing machine and you don't need a serger, and the measurements are very simple to follow. Once you're done cutting everything up, you'll need to hem all sides of each panel. This step is really important because since we're working with a linen fabric, as you can see, the fabric is already fraying, and hemming all sides will prevent this from happening. I would say this is the lengthiest step throughout the whole project, because it does take quite some time to sew all sides of each panel, but it's extremely worth it because now the inside of your skirt will look really professional. There will be no fraying edges and it would just look more complete. Once you're done sewing your first seam, you can cut off the extra fabric. Now you'll just have to roll it and sew one last seam to close the hem, and do the exact same steps for all sides of each panel. Now that all sides are hemmed, I've placed all tiers together and placed them front sides facing each other. So now you can close the ends of each panel and sew them shut so you have a full circle for each tier. Once you have 3 full circles, we'll be adding a basting stitch to the top of tier 2 and 3 to create the ruffles. For your basting stitch, you'll need to use a large stitch length, so I'm changing mine to 4. And remember to put this back to normal when you're done with this step. Make sure to leave out extra thread at the end of each basting stitch because you'll need this to pull the fabric together. Here I have tier 1 and tier 2 laying flat. I'm going to flip tier 2 into tier 1 so that both front sides of each tier are facing each other. Once they're flipped, align the side seams of both tiers and pin them. This will give you a benchmark of how much you need to scrunch the circumference of tier 2 with your basting stitch so that it equals to the bottom circumference of your tier 1. So once you're done pinning the side seams, you can start by pulling the basting stitch and slowly moving your fabric inwards. Make sure that you are taking your time while doing this because your basting stitch could break if you're tugging on the string too much, and it could also get stuck. Once you're satisfied with the scrunches, you can use pins to secure everything. After everything is pinned, you can flip it to see how the scrunches are distributed. If you need to make changes, you can make it now before you start sewing everything together. After you've finished scrunching both tiers and attaching them together with pins, you can go ahead and start sewing everything together. Make sure to take your time here as well. Since you're going to be sewing over ruffles, you're going to need to adjust as you sew. Now it's time to add our darts. So earlier on we had added 4 extra inches to our waistband measurement. So to calculate the dart placement, I took a measuring tape and I folded it in half, and then I folded it one more time. I used that measurement to calculate the distance of the darts on both ends of the skirt. So once you mark your dart points, each dart is going to be 1 inch wide, so you can mark half an inch on each side of the dart points, and the length of your dart is going to be 4 inches. Now just connect all the points to form a triangular shape for both of your darts. Now your third and fourth dart is going to be between your first two darts, and it's going to be 1 inches apart from your other dart, and also going to be 1 inch wide and 4 inches long. Now to ensure that you're sewing a straight line on your dart, I really recommend this method. I wish I knew this earlier myself. When I first started sewing, it was so difficult to sew a straight line, but I can assure you that if you pin the dart this way, it'll give you a straight line all the time. So as you can see, the pins are perfectly aligned with the dart markings in the back. Now when you start sewing the dart, make sure you start off by doing a reverse stitch and then sew along the line. Really take your time while you're doing this to ensure that you're going along the line. And once you reach towards the end, sew as close as possible as you can to the fabric. Leave some extra thread so you can tie a couple of knots to secure the dart. Now for this step, I actually forgot to record myself cutting the waistband, but here I'm basically just sewing it onto the skirt. The width of the waistband is 2.5 inches, and the length just needs to be enough to cover the circumference of the skirt waistband. If there's extra material, we'll just cut it off in the next step. I should have mentioned this earlier, but before you start to sew your waistband on, you should place a pin where you want your strings to come out from. So once you've reached the end, just do a reverse stitch, and we'll come back later to do a final stitch to lock this all in. So since this is going to be your opening and you don't need all that extra fabric, we're going to cut off the excess and leave some material so we can do a little tiny hem to close off that section so the fabric doesn't fray. Make sure you use the pin as reference to know how much material you need to cut off. So now with the chalk, just put a marking here so you can remove the pin. Now to hem this part, you're just going to have to fold it in 2 times. Just sew a seam through it and do the same thing for the other side. To lock everything in, do one last stitch in this area and make sure to do a reverse stitch in the beginning and in the end. The opening should look something like this. Since we're using a drawstring closure instead of a zip, we need to create sort of a tunnel so we can put the string through it. Start by folding the waistband inwards and using pins to secure the position. This will ensure that you're sewing a straight seam. You can even give this area a good press before you start sewing if you want to be 100% sure that the fabric is not shifting. Once everything is pinned down, you can sew your final seam. Now the last step is to make a drawstring. So I just use a scrap fabric, and depending on how long your fabric is, you'll need to cut up a couple of these 1 inch wide straps. Just make sure that the straps are long enough to cover your waist circumference and a little more since it's an adjustable drawstring. If you're using multiple 1 inch straps, sew them together like this. Fold a 1/4 inch inwards from the top and fold a 1/4 inch on both sides inwards so that all the raw edges are in the inside, and sew a seam through it. Keep folding a 1/4 inches inwards as you go, and once it's complete, put a safety pin at the tip of the drawstring and push it all the way through. And this is how the front of your skirt should look. Thank you so much for watching, and if you're a beginner, please let me know if this video was helpful. If you would like to see more beginner-friendly videos and learn more sewing tips and tricks, please subscribe to my channel and leave a comment below of what you would like to learn. Thank you!